Okay, well, welcome, comrades, to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library. My name is Eugene Rule, and I will be your host and moderator for today's program, which features Suzanne Gordon and Steve Early, speaking on why the left should care about veterans issues. By explanation, by a large margin, US military veterans favored Donald Trump for president in 2016 and voted for him again by a smaller margin in 2020. As Trump gears up for another White House run, he continues to woo veterans and their families, plus active duty military personnel, as part of his right-wing political base. Progressive veterans organizations like Common Defense, Veterans for Peace, and About Face are working with unions and other allies to counter these efforts. Among the issues they are organizing around are the parallel threats of privatization of the Department of Veterans Affairs, VA, and the US Postal Service, two of the biggest unionized employers of former military personnel. And as a veteran myself, I would like to add a few personal comments. I joined the Marine Corps back in 1957, and it wasn't the brightest thing I've ever done, but it wasn't the dumbest either. I came out of it with body and soul intact, but I was one of the lucky ones. So I tell people that even though I am an atheist, I still thank God that she never sent me into combat. I've seen what combat does to people, especially since I joined Veterans for Peace. I'm thinking of one guy in particular, Maurice. He's a big black guy, really tough looking, who served in Vietnam and returned to civilian life without a scratch. But after about 10 years, it hit him. He started using drugs and alcohol, lost his job, lost his family and his home. He lived on the streets for about 10 years before he pulled himself together. And now he's one of the most gentle people I know. He works with the homeless veterans and with deported vets. We have a chapter and a house in Tijuana, especially for deported veterans. We have another chapter in Vietnam, working with the Congress to provide aid to victims of Agent Orange, which are both Vietnamese and Americans. So it's not surprising that Trump finds a lot of support among veterans. But it's not just a left-right issue. There are much larger political and moral issues, and it needs needs analysis of both the political and the socialist nature. So let me pause here and give you a little background on our library and our institute. We're all in cyberspace right now, in various places across the nation and around the world. But our physical and spiritual home is the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library, which was founded about 50 years ago and is now located at 6501 Telegraph Avenue in Oakland, about a mile south of the University of California campus in Berkeley. And we are blessed, as those of you who are actually here, with wonderful weather today. The ICSS, the Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library, was formed in 2004 as the research and educational arm of the library in order to further the library's goals of preserving the written heritage of Marx and Engels and supporting the struggle for racial and gender equality and for socialists. And some of us are members of specific parties and tendencies, others are not. So our workshops, forums, and publications do not follow any party line, nor do they represent any kind of group consensus on the issues involved. We are united, however, in our respect for the work of Karl Marx and our belief that his work will remain as important for the class struggles of the future as they have been for the past. and we continue to draw inspiration from Marx's 11th thesis on Feuerbach, that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. And our speakers today exemplify this Marxian principle, I believe. Suzanne Gordon and Steve Early are both dedicated journalists and unionists. They speak the truth to power and to the powerless. And as members of both labor unions, the Richmond Progressive Alliance, and Labor for Bernie, they are also active participants in the struggle for social justice, opening their home for strategic discussions and social events. And as a member of both of these organizations, Richmond Progressive RPA and Labor for Bernie, I've enjoyed their hospitality many times, and am particularly happy to be able to welcome them to our Sunday morning program. So I will end my remarks here, and unless our tech crew has something to say, we'll turn it over to Steve and to Suzanne, and you know what to do, so do it.
All right. First thing is hit the unmute button. Did that work? I hope so.
Yes, it did. You are coming loud and clear. Good.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here today on a Sunday morning, particularly Richard Wright, who originally got in touch with us about this and definitely has the most dramatic backdrop that I can see. That does not look like Texas, Richard. So I guess you're no longer in Texas. And I also want to thank Gene for his warm introduction and help with all the arrangements and all the other folks who worked on this. As I told Gene, we're going to try to keep our opening remarks real short. We've got a lot of people on the call with decades of activism in multiple fields, including people like Richard, who worked at the VA, which neither of us have ever done, and people who've been veterans like Gene. Neither of us have ever served in the military. So we got a lot of subject matter expertise here from other folks on the call. I will just mention that this book that we're going to be talking about today, in connection with making an argument for the left and progressives to pay more attention to veterans issues, the new book is called Our Veterans, Winners, Losers, Friends and Enemies on the New Terrain of Veterans Affairs. And it's kind of a follow-up to two previous books. This one's coming out from Duke University Press in the spring, but the two previous books that Suzanne did on this subject were for Cornell University Press. One was called The Battle for Veterans Healthcare, and the other was called Wounds of War. And both focused primarily on veterans healthcare issues. I'm just going to say a few words about the contents of this upcoming book and our 2 years of research and writing by committee on it. The book, I think, is a little bit unique in the sense that it tries to look at the emotional and social and economic and psychological impact of military service on the 19 million Americans who've been in the military a little bit differently. We look at being in the military as a job, as a form of work, with its own distinct occupational safety and health hazards, most of which are not related to combat. The moving story that Gene just told us is one that is true of the experience of many, many veterans, including post 9/11 veterans who've served in the last 20 years, but who've come away from the military in pretty bad shape for reasons having nothing to do with being anywhere near a combat zone. And as we document in the book, the problem is not the VA, which we'll get to in a moment, but their past employer, the Department of Defense, the largest federal agency, which is a terrible non-union employer, one of the most unsafe in the world for both its own employees and other people near its myriad impacts. And so whether the problem is historically exposure to Agent Orange, a Vietnam vet era problem, or the Gulf War syndrome, or the exposure to burn pits over the last 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan that's adversely affected the health of hundreds of thousands of post 9/11 veterans. The villain of the story is the Pentagon, the DoD. So, our book describes how military service can make a later transition to civilian life very, very difficult, very challenging. We describe how the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA, the second largest federal agency, plays a really important role and a major social safety net for the 9 million veterans who are able to qualify for socialized medicine as delivered by the VA's national network of hospitals and clinics. The millions of more veterans who are able to take advantage of the GI Bill, going back to school essentially at full government expense, housing benefits, and many other benefits. The VA, as we point out in the book, some people may know, is under attack. The right wing wants to privatize healthcare delivery to veterans. Suzanne's going to talk more about that and its implications for the single payer movement when I shut up in a moment. We also take a critical look at the rest of the culture of veteranhood. And on that terrain, there are corporations, there are unions, there are philanthropies, there are new and old veterans organizations, all of which claim to be pro-veterans. We love our veterans. We'll do anything for our veterans. In fact, some of these entities, Amazon, Walmart, who claim to be pro-veteran employers, have a pretty bad record of treating veterans and other workers. So we get into that in the book. We're allies, of course, of unions, particularly those unions that represent workers at the VA, the American Federation of Government Employees, the National Nurses United. Suzanne's worked closely with both of them. Big supporters of the postal workers campaign to save the US mail from privatization, because, as Jean mentioned, more than 100,000 postal employees around the country previously served in the military. So we report on the whole struggle about privatization of VA, which began under Obama, continued under Trump, made it much worse, now continues, sadly, under Biden. We also look at the politics of Veterans Affairs. Both major parties have been involved in a major effort over the last 10, 15 years to recruit more former, usually officers, military people, to run for Congress. And the pitch is that, they're going to be a different kind of politician, whether they're corporate Democrats or conservative Republicans. They're going to be so much more committed to the public good. And they're going to be so much more bipartisan. And, part of our book is debunking that myth and showing how bad many of these people are, not just on military and foreign policy issues, as you might expect. Very few anti-war vets, other than the brave Tulsi Gabbard. But what's even more disgraceful, following the footsteps of John McCain, many of these veterans in Congress, these so-called service candidates who get elected, aren't even reliable allies of their fellow working class and poor veterans who have problems that remain unaddressed. So we also look at the age and the race and the class and gender and other kinds of divisions within the veteran community, based often on past officer rank or lack of it, current political orientation. Veterans are not a monolith for sure. A lot of people have a stereotypical vision of a veteran, Vietnam era guy, old white guy sitting at the bar at the American Legion Hall, the VFW post. Hey, that's our veteran. Well, that's not what a lot of veterans look like today, particularly the millions who've served since 9/11. So we look at some of the real tensions between the older veterans organizations and some of the strengths and weaknesses of the newer ones that have emerged over the last 20 years. As Jean said, we look at the pursuit of the vet vote by both major parties in 2016, 2020. It's going to be resumed in the midterms this year and the next presidential election. Veterans, not surprisingly, ended up on both sides of the barricades in Black Lives Matter protests, certainly on both sides of the barricades on January 6th in 2021 when the Capitol was stormed. just for the record, as a safe state voter out here in California, I cast my presidential ballot in 2020 for the only all-veteran slate in the race. I don't know if people on this call know, but both Howie Hawkins and Angela Walker, who were Green Party running mates for president and vice president in 2020, served in the military. Nobody else running did. But we end up in the book with kind of a chapter that talks about the need for a new agenda for Veterans Affairs, one that would hopefully counter this ongoing, systematic, really well-funded Republican effort to exploit veterans' grievances and problems for political gain and for very bad purposes, as we've seen. And the way that we believe that that this can be done is by tying these very important models for social programs and better service provision in the area of healthcare and education and housing. You have models, the VA healthcare system, the GI Bill, that really should be expanded to cover everybody in this country. Not a new idea if you've been listening to Bernie Sanders speeches for the last 30 years or the last 10. But we argue really that we have to take these models of programs that are now veterans only, strengthen the movements that are trying to expand them to all people in this country, primarily poor and working class people who need greater access to free higher education, free healthcare, affordable housing, and defend the veterans healthcare system is one important model for that. And that's the issue that Suzanne would like to talk about before we open it up to questions and discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Steve. It's really, I think that I discovered what I consider and what we consider the sort of left's problem with veterans when I was writing during my whole 15 years or more of writing about veterans' healthcare issues. And there has been a sustained attack on the VA. It started with an attack on the Veterans Health Administration, which is the largest sub-agency of the Department of Veterans Affairs. And it was started, really fomented by Republicans and particularly the Koch brothers, who funded something called the Concerned Veterans for America. They have spent literally millions of dollars a year bashing the VA. And the rationale for the Koch brothers is really not because they have any stake in the healthcare industry, but because they have a huge stake in preventing any positive social change that relies on government participation, government running the healthcare system, expanding government programs. They're just, libertarian, anti-government folks. And they have utilized various problems in the VA, wait times, whatever, you name it, a little tiny problem, a big problem, they exploited. They go to the media and they have really tried to tarnish the VA's reputation, and in the process tarnish public support for progressive causes in government participation and payment of whatever it is, whether it's healthcare or education or whatever. And in 2014, they managed to blow up a small but significant wait time scandal in a couple of VA facilities in the South and Southwest, and use it to tarnish government entirely. And basically they succeeded. And there had been a huge amount of public support for the VA prior to their efforts. And the Pew Charitable Trust did an analysis of support for government, and it sort of plummeted, with the VA being a poster child for why you shouldn't trust the government about anything, the post office, whatever, And so it became clear to me that not only was this right-wing attack affecting people who were right-wing, but it was also affecting people on the left. And, you know, many people on the left, because of the class composition of the left and the class composition of veterans, don't know a lot of veterans. So if they hear something awful about the VA healthcare system, they don't have any reality check. You know, they can't go to Joe down the street and find out, well, actually, you know, I'm one of the 92% of veterans who the VFW polled and found that, you know, I love the VA. I don't want it to be privatized. And so I discovered that many people on the left, you know, liberal to left to socialist even spectrum, really were buying this purple Kool-Aid. And I was stunned when I would tell somebody, you know, somebody would ask me, what are you writing? And I'd say, I'm writing about VA healthcare. And they'd say, oh my God, it's so awful. And I'd have to contain myself. Or, you know, they'd say, are you writing an expose about the VA? And I would say, yeah, I'm exposing what a great healthcare system it is. That started to become my line. So I think that people on the left tend not to pay enough attention to veterans. Some people, because rightfully we're, you know, fighting militarism, think that every single veteran is some kind of right-wing nutcase who's going to storm the Capitol. There is a small subset of veterans who are quite angry and disturbed, but they are certainly not all veterans. Some people on the left think the VA is kind of part of the problem because I've heard people say it enables the Pentagon because, you know, it's somehow enabling, fixing the problems that veterans have in military service or in combat is somehow, I don't know, enabling these wars to go on. And I think most people just don't know anything about the VA, you know. They don't know that its budget is different. You know, I've been in meetings where so-called experts have said that the VA gets its budget from the Pentagon, which is hardly the case. And if it did get its budget from the Pentagon, maybe its budget would be higher. And in fact, interestingly, one of the big demands of many socialists and progressives is that any funding for our military adventures has to include a rigorous calculation of the costs of wars. The cost of wars, not, it should include the cost of a calculation, the cost of war to the people in the country we're invading, but also it doesn't even include the cost of paying for the care, education, compensation, benefits into the long term for people who have served in the military or have been wounded in their service. So I think that, I mean, I'm thrilled that we're doing this panel, but I think that people on the left could more productively understand the issues that veterans care about and their families and communities care about, and become more ardent supporters or knowledgeable about, supporters of those issues and knowledgeable about them. You know, veterans, when I talk to people in the single payer movement or the Medicare for All movement, because the VA healthcare is really the fulcrum of this problematic of privatization, of where the anti-government forces mobilize and what they target. So I'm going to really focus on kind of VA healthcare. One could also focus on the Veterans Benefits Administration, which is radically underfunded and understaffed, and is actually the portal to getting healthcare and other benefits. But I'm not going to talk that much about that, although I'd be glad to answer questions. But I think that it would be really great if folks who were in the anti-privatization movement of public services, you know, against charter schools, against the privatization of the post office, of the privatization of the postal, of the weather service. I mean, Michael Lewis, who's hardly a lefty, when he did the book, The First Risk, really discussed this threat of the privatization of everything. And very often, so there's the anti-privatization movement. There's the struggle for educational benefits for all of us and free education. There's a struggle for a universal healthcare system and for a national health program of some sort. And there's obviously the struggle against militarism and this bloated, out of control military budget, which is eating up and cannibalizing money that could be used for so many other issues. I think that it the new word today is intersectionality, health equity, need for models of adequate, not just payment for healthcare, but healthcare delivery. And I think that one could productively try to mobilize some more veterans around these issues. Now, Bernie Sanders had an excellent Veterans for Bernie campaign, but I just went online searching for veterans for single payer, veterans for Medicare for all, and all I could find was right-wing attacks on Medicare for all from Koch brothers funded veterans. So I think it's really important for us to look at the issues that veterans care about, to support those issues, and to also recruit more veterans to support progressive issues. We've seen that in the post office, in the anti-privatization of the post office, and we've seen that in the struggle against privatization of the VA, Veterans for Peace, which so many of you are part of, is a tiny but very powerful voice, and really the only really powerful voice of veterans, because so many of the veteran service organizations have bought into this privatization. I also think, I think that it would be great if more and more progressive groups joined in the fight against VA privatization. Physicians for National Health Care, Physicians for National Health Program has done some of this. In my view, not enough. We have worked increasingly with Pramila Jayapal's office to try to help healthcare reform activists understand why the VA is important and why they need to talk more and educate themselves more about the VA. But I mean, one of the things we talk about in our book is, the veteran population in the United States is radically diminishing. That doesn't mean that their problems are diminishing health-wise or otherwise because of multiple deployments and toxic exposures and so forth, which last forever. So you can have a diminishing number of veterans and have an increasing budget for their healthcare, their compensation, et cetera, because they have so many more problems than earlier veteran cohorts who would have died from their wounds of war and not had to live with them forever with these multiple chronic conditions. But so you have a shrinking number of veterans, but they still play an outsized role in the political debate because they have this kind of moral suasion. And so to have veterans, even if it was a small group of veterans arguing for Medicare for all, arguing for free education as opposed to fighting it, would be very powerful. As Steve mentioned, veterans are constantly mobilized by the right to fight all kinds of progressive initiative. In our book, we talk about the ways in California where a particular vet was paid tens of thousands of dollars by the pharmaceutical industry in one referendum to allow public hospitals to negotiate drug prices, to lower drug prices like the VA does. And veterans were mobilized to fight this. They were mobilized to believe that supporters of this initiative were somehow this initiative was going to somehow destroy the VA's ability to negotiate for lower drug costs, which somehow would affect them. In the same veteran mobilized an effort to defeat a proposition that would have expanded rent control. And somehow they convinced veterans to speak out against this, because somehow it would somehow fictionally impact homeless programs for veterans. And the same is true of efforts to pass Medicare for all. Interestingly, of course, the right wing wants to dismantle the VA and couldn't think of anything that they, just does everything they possibly can to do this, but they attack people who are pro Medicare for all because we want to somehow dismantle the VA, and that Medicare for all will dismantle the VA. So if we don't organize veterans and educate ourselves about their issues, somebody else is going to organize them against us, very effectively. And so that is absolutely one reason why veterans, why the left, I think, needs to pay more attention to veterans. From the point of view of healthcare, the VA is really a model of the kind of healthcare system those of us who aren't veterans should enjoy. I mean, obviously, there are problems due to underfunding and understaffing, but it is the best healthcare system in the country, and very few folks on the left know much about it. I mean, they know their VA hospitals. We've all seen the signs on the highway. Very few people know what goes on in those hospitals and health clinics and so forth. Very few people know that the VA trains 70% of American doctors and most of America's other healthcare professionals. Very few people know that the VA is the biggest research powerhouse in the nation. I always thank the VA for my shingles vaccine. If I smoked, I would thank it for a nicotine patch. If I had a implantable cardiac pacemaker, I'd thank it for that. But and almost nobody knows about the VA's fourth mission, which is to help the civilian sector healthcare system in natural disasters, which it has done locally with wildfires and volcano eruptions and floods. During Hurricane, it was a Katrina or Maria, I can't remember which one. The VA's hospital in Puerto Rico was the only functioning hospital on the island and treated not just veterans. COVID-19, the VA has mobilized its fourth mission to send staff all over the country to help in overwhelmed hospitals. They took over state veterans homes. They took over private sector nursing homes. They welcomed civilian sector patients into their own hospitals in places like New York and New Jersey. I mean, it's extraordinary, but it's also extraordinary that nobody knows about this. And it's extraordinary, but not surprising, because the VA doesn't do a very good job at telling its story. And I think particularly doesn't do a very good job at making it clear that the VA healthcare system isn't just for vets, that it serves us all. So I just think that it's really important for folks in anti-privatization movements and for folks in who want to promote free education for all of us, and for folks who are interested in reforming healthcare to learn more about the VA. I want to give you an example of this that was very telling for me and Steve. We were asked to speak at a wonderful conference put on by the Communications Workers of America for folks who worked in the public sector and were fighting privatization of local, municipal, and state services, as well as federal services. And there were about 300 people in the room. All of them were against privatization. All of them were very aware of the kind of propaganda that was mobilized to attack their, their particular corner of the world. Excuse me, I just need to get some water. And they were all against privatization. They all understood the lies that were being told about public sector unions, about public sector employees, and so forth. And I got up in front of this audience of about 300 people, and I asked them a question, which I often ask, which was, how many of you think the VA is a great healthcare system? And about 2 people raised their hand. And then I said, how many of you think that the VA is a terrible healthcare system and it needs to be privatized? And like, everybody in the room raised their hands, except for the 2 people. And this was, to me, a very dramatic example of why folks need to understand these attacks on the VA, and they need to support the VA, and they need to support veterans and mobilize veterans to support the kinds of things that we're all struggling for. And I think that's plenty. I've said plenty. We both would be delighted to answer questions whenever you have them.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks so much, Suzanne and Steve, for bringing this issue to the fore and giving us a chance to talk about it. I know if my friend Maurice were here, he'd point out that the only thing keeping him alive now is the VA. And I've heard that from so many people, and even my older brother, who's dependent on the VA, understands this. And although he's has his periods of being pro-Trump on the issue of the VA, everybody I know just says it's really great. So I think we need to keep that in mind. Okay, well, before we move on, let me make a few announcements. First of all, I hoped Alan would be here because he's the one that set our next week's program up. But next week we'll have Steve Gowans, who is a reporter and discusses many things, but he's going to be talking about the killer's henchman, capitalism and the COVID-19 disaster. And so that's next week. Steve is a very kind of like a Renaissance man. He really speaks on a very lot of things. So we're looking forward to that. And then after that, we're still looking for, we're still exploring our options. And we're a very frugal organization. We do not need a lot of money. We're, largely self-financed, but we do need money. And so to Richard Fallenbaum, I hope is on to give us his spiel on how to provide some funding for.
Thank you, Gene. Yeah, I'm going to put in the chat some information on how you can contribute. But if you missed that, there's also on your email announcement, there is the same information, and also on our website, ICSSmarks.com. You can find that same information. So it's very easy to make a contribution, and I urge you to do so. Back to you, Gene.
Okay, and remind you, I believe it is ICSSmarks.org.
Yeah.
So bear that in mind, but because anyway, so we'll move on to comments and discussion. I don't see anybody in the who has raised their hands, so I don't have a stack right now. But we have Mark Anderson, we have Yusuf, we have Richard W, and we have a number. We have a couple of numbers. And so let me start with the first 3, Mark and Albertson, Yusuf, and Richard W. Mark.
Yes, good day, Susan, and good day, Stephen. Thank you for this presentation. It's a topic that's really worthy talking about. Just so you know, I do historical research at a military magazine. That's my job. I'm the historical research editor at Army Aviation magazine. And based off some of what Stephen was alluding to in his opening remarks and what Suzanne stated about that the left should take more of an interest in Veterans Affairs or else someone else will, and that's specifically the right, and they have. I don't think it's an accident that many of the police, besides the veterans, opted to support Trump as well. Of course, some of your policemen are what? Veterans. It shouldn't be a surprise. But the first thing I thought of as you two were talking was Berlin 103 years ago, when this fledgling German Republic, together with the German army, cracked down on the left in Berlin in 1919, talking about the Spartacus uprising, and also 6 months later in Munich. So the point that you folks are making here, that the left better pay attention to Veterans Affairs, that the right will, yeah, because when you look at what happened in January 1919, the Freikorps, the right-wing group, the right-wing extremists, the Freikorps, many of whom were what? German veterans from the First World War. So that should be a historical lesson that should not be forgotten. Any comments you want to make, go right ahead.
Okay, Suzanne, and Steve, do you want to answer them one by one?
Steve, do you want to say something? Steve, you're muted.
Steve, there we go.
Sorry about that. No, Mark made a very, very good point about what we call in the book the vet to cop pipeline. And it's not just some vets. 20% of the law enforcement personnel, military backgrounds. And this is a tough one, even for the more progressive veterans organizations to tackle, but we argue in the book that they need to tackle this. In the middle of the Black Lives Matter protests, there was an understandable focus on the Pentagon equipment to police pipeline. The fact that, billions of dollars of cast-off military equipment ends up in the hands of local cops. We have a mass uprising around Black lives and criminal justice issues and police shootings. And, American cities suddenly look like downtown Baghdad during the occupation, or a village in Afghanistan with military equipment, all kind, on display that local police departments have gotten, courtesy of the federal government, from the Pentagon. But the more serious problem that Mark puts his finger on is who's now wearing that new uniform and has their combat experience in Iraq or Afghanistan interfered with their ability to be a better rather than a worse cop. And, we looked at a lot of the studies on this, a lot of research. Even some police chiefs are pretty concerned about the behavior of some of the vets who've been recruited and encouraged to go from the military directly into law enforcement. And the folks that come in with service-related conditions from their military experience, they have PTSD, they have alcohol or drug abuse problems. Those things don't get better under the stress of being a cop. And the whole problem that we face of trying to replace or reduce the impact of a militarized model of policing, how do you do that when 20% of your workforce are people who come out of the military, and their training and conditioning and socialization is not exactly conducive often to the community policing model, to police reform, to reducing the use of violence by police officers, and in fact, sadly reinforces the militarized occupying army model of law enforcement that we need to change in this country.
Well, and I think you can also have a very productive discussion on this issue by talking about how bad, about the pipeline and where it starts, because one of the reasons why so many folks are brought into this pipeline is because of our reliance on military contractors, because fewer and fewer vets who are in the military have the opportunity to get jobs in the military that would prepare them for civilian sector jobs, because the military contractors do so much stuff like logistics and cooking and laundry and clerking and being mechanics and so forth, because they don't, after 9/11, or when we started having the all volunteer military, Rumsfeld decided to make it smaller, and do more with less, which meant that somebody had to do more with more, which is the contractors. And also, if you look at the pipeline, many counselors in these transition programs actually steer vets into policing, instead of saying, well, you could actually, what are you interested in, Steve? Are you interested in becoming a linguist? Are you interested in what are you, here's how you could pursue that. They just put them into this pipeline of becoming a cop or working for a private security firm. And then finally, there's the argument, that it ain't so good for you if you have PTSD or whatever to become a cop. I mean, for my book, Wounds of War, I interviewed a guy in Hawaii who was in Iraq and very severe PTSD, hyper severe, and went to a couple of stints in residential programs. And he was a deputy sheriff, and he was told point blank by a psychiatrist, if you want to keep your family and your wife, you cannot stay in law enforcement because it's PTSD-agenic for you. It produces this, and the VA gave him money to retrain in construction. So, I think, as Steve pointed out, you should be extremely careful when you broach this issue. You don't want to attack these people. You don't want to say they shouldn't work as cops, but you want to say that, wait a minute, you are overrepresented in police forces, and there are other choices in the world for you. You could use your GI Bill, but you are not being steered into those choices. And if you have certain conditions, this is a really bad job for you, as opposed to, you're a bad person. And I think this is the nuance here that Steve was alluding to. You can have the discussion about vets as cops in a couple of ways. You can say, you're bad people, so you shouldn't go join other bad people who are going to attack the good people. That's a mistake. That's not the way it should be framed. The way it should be framed is, wait a minute, you're being steered, almost exclusively into this choice. There are historical reasons for this. We need to get rid of these contractors. If the military really is, as it promises in its recruitment campaigns, going to train you to be the best you can be, et cetera, and have all these opportunities, well, then it has to have jobs that offer those opportunities. And some opportunities are not good ones.
Thank you. We're going to move on, but after 3 years in the Marine Corps, the only job I could get when I got out was as a prison guard. So just to add that there.
Illustrates the point.
So anyway, go back to our stack. We have Richard W, and we have two numbers, one ending in 1162 and the other ending in 6894. So Yusuf,
Yeah.
over to you.
Yes, thank you. No, I wholeheartedly agree that the left should embrace veterans affairs. As I had a argument in a peace group saying that against somebody who said that the peace movement shouldn't have anything to do with veterans. Veterans are working class people, not only veterans, but also serving soldiers. The great majority are working class people. Lenin embraced them. Workers, peasant and soldiers committees, the Soviets were called. So, and I commend Workers' World, I think, for organizing American Servicemen's Union during Vietnam. I think that was a a good initiative, and I wholly support, commend the work of Veterans for Peace and other such organizations and to speakers. Incidentally, I served a minuscule amount of time as a soldier in Turkey. I tend to forget that, but that's another story.
Well, you could
Conscription.
join Veterans for Peace then. But, Suzanne and Steve, did you want to respond here?
Yes, well, I invoking the memory of the American Servicemen's Union is very important because, as people recall, the GI anti-war movement was really a powerful force in shortening the U.S. military involvement in Southeast Asia. And but when people started to move in the direction of
Steve, you're
when people started moving the direction of organizing soldiers into a union in the late 60s, early 70s, that was criminalized pretty quick. As I recall, it's a felony, 15 years in jail. But it's interesting, in other militaries, there are models for rank and file soldiers having representation. In the Netherlands, there is the equivalent of a soldiers union. And in the Labor Party program, when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader and making his second run for prime minister, there was actually a plank in the party platform, a proposal that enlisted personnel in the UK be allowed to have an association, not full collective bargaining rights, but a kind of meet and confer sounding board group that would enable them to voice their workplace concerns. So I think that's, Jeremy obviously didn't win. We have Boris Johnson instead, and all the disasters associated with him. But I think that's an example of the left thinking about how can we make an appeal to people in the military as workers around real grievances they have, which if we ignore, others will exploit.
Yeah, and I think that it's, I was thinking as folks were talking, I was talking about many people on the left not knowing any veterans, but also a lot of veterans don't know anybody on the left. And so, you can build stereotypes of people that people buy when they don't know people. And so that's why it would be really important to sort of overcome both of these. I mean, we all live in our little bubbles now, and then the bubbles are reinforced by the internet and so forth. So that's another reason, but these are, I think, really important issues to discuss.
Okay, well, let's see. I'm back here. Well, thank you. And we're going to move forward with next speaker is Richard W., followed by two people with numbers.
Yeah, one of them's mine. It's Kit.
One ending in 1162 and following that,
Yeah,
one
that's
ending
mine.
in 6894. So Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, so let me try that. Thank you for the presentations from both of you. As I think you alluded to it, Steve, you alluded to it initially. I have a vested interest in this. I served for 4 years in the Navy back in the early 70s. And then I spent 10 years in the Inspector General for the VA. So I was, you mentioned the, I think Suzanne mentioned the flap over in Phoenix. And I was directly involved in all that. So I got a nice little bonus out of that. I wanted to raise one point, and that is that I think the part of the recognition of the VA goes back to a lot of people don't even recognize veterans. And, I mean, especially in the Vietnam era, I mean, there was this alleged hostility to veterans, which I didn't see, but, but I think the newspapers blew it up. But nevertheless, I mean, people just, it was like they didn't want to hear about it. And so consequently that feeling, I think, ties over into the VA, that they don't want to hear about, all of it. It's like almost like the ostrich sticking its hand in the sand. I had a couple of questions here. One question was, you mentioned that the support for Trump by veterans. I was wondering how that broke down, or if there is any information, is how that breaks down Vietnam era vets versus the post-Vietnam era vets, the so-called volunteer military. The second thing I had here was, you didn't mention anything about the you didn't, admittedly, this is on the VA health system. There's another important aspect of the VA that really gets overlooked, and that's the nursing home. And why that occurs to me is, it seems to me that that the AFL-CIO could use that as a model to help organize. Make it as a project for the AFL-CIO for labor. By the way, I'm in both the CWA and the AFGE. Brother Steve, and but it seems to me that they could use that as a model to help recruit into the union movement. So with that, I'll shut up and pass on the torch. Thank you.
Steve, do you want to comment on the, I'd have something to say, but do you want to comment?
No, why don't you start with the nursing home idea, which I think is great.
Well, I'm not clear what you're talking about. Are you talking about that because, I mean, one of the reasons why the right is attacking the VA is because it's unionized. And I mean, interestingly, I'm not sure, Richard, what you mean about the nursing homes, but the VA, and I wrote about this in Women's War, has a very impressive nursing home system.
Exactly, yes.
And I think most people don't know that, every VA facility has a nursing home. They call them community living centers now. And they're a little bit different than the average nursing home, because the average nursing home has a lot more women, than men, and they're older, whereas VA nursing homes have more men than women, and they're actually younger often. But the CLCs are a great model, and during COVID, they didn't have any of the problems that they had in the state vet homes, which are not run by the VA, and also in private nursing homes, because they pay people better. They don't have to hold a million jobs in order, to make a living, barely a living. So once again, the VA as a model, maybe you should comment, Steve, on.
Well, no, I think Richard's point is very timely, because as people may have noticed, during the pandemic, some of the worst nursing home disasters occurred in state-run veterans' homes, which in the press coverage too often got conflated with the VA, where it left the impression that, another screw up by the VA killing old veterans. Well, in Massachusetts, in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, and other states, even in states where they had not contracted out state veterans home management to private firms, creating additional problems, there were a huge number of deaths, terrible examples of mismanagement of difficult COVID care conditions. In Massachusetts, the scandal was a result of Republican patronage appointees to run the state veterans homes. The Republican governor installed cronies who had no background in healthcare. anyway, I think that's a very excellent point because on the one hand, you have a long-term care system as part of the VA that performed well under these pandemic conditions. You have state nursing homes that were a fiasco. Back to the politics question, Hillary Clinton in 2016 was not popular among veterans and active duty personnel. I mean, Trump really thumped her. Biden, his son served in the military, had more ties to veteran service organizations, did better, but he still lost among veterans by about 7-8 percentage points. I think the exit polling indicated that he beat Trump, Biden, among active duty military personnel, particularly officers, surprisingly, really became disenchanted with Trump. One of the most interesting things about the 2019-2020 presidential election cycle was the degree of support for that great socialist defender of veterans, Bernie Sanders, former chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee in the Senate, and somebody throughout his long career has been a supporter of veterans issues in Vermont. At the time that he was forced to drop out of the race in 2020, the second race, Bernie led all the other candidates, including Trump, in the amount of money he had raised from active duty military personnel. This was reported in Military Times, and I think was a testament to his efforts, the popularity of many of his ideas, and the fact that, as Richard indicated, the attitudes of younger active duty military people and younger veterans are different from those who served in the military 30 or 40, 50 years ago.
Just a quick interruption here. I'm kind of wondering, how many people in this conversation are veterans? Is there, besides Gene and I, are there any other veterans here?
Well, as I said, I spent a minuscule amount of time in the Turkish army. There's a universal draft for males. We can't get out.
Okay, well, let's move forward. We have two numbers. First, we have 1162, and then we have 6894. And Mark, did you want to get back? And then we have Rich and Kit. And then we'll put Mark back on. Do you want to get back on, Mark? Okay, so you'll go after Rich and Kit. And then
Yeah, you can. They can go first.
Well, we got the numbers first, and then we have Rich and Kit. And then
Well, I'm on after 1162. This is Kit.
Oh, this is Kit? Oh, so you're 1162?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes, I am.
go ahead. But we still have Rich, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he has his own number, which we usually share. Well, I want to thank you very much for presenting on this issue. I concur that many people, especially women, don't have direct military experience unless one was a spouse or mother or close relative to someone who was in the military. Anyway, my aunt worked at the VA hospital in Fresno, but she didn't tell me a whole lot about her experience. I just knew that's where she worked when I was growing up. And, it was always in the back of my mind when she went to work there. And recently I met a young woman who quickly told me the story of why she had a dog because she needed it for post-traumatic stress syndrome. Because she had served in the military. And it surprised me because I don't meet very many women in particular that have served in the military. I have mostly friends who have been in the military. And I also give to nonprofit that helps disabled vets. I once tried to do a fundraiser to obtain laptops for young military in the Iraq War who wanted to be able to communicate with their loved ones, but couldn't. And these military staff were, very sad and depressed over their, situation, not being able to communicate with their families directly. But unfortunately, the fundraiser didn't go well because the people that I knew couldn't, they didn't come to the event. And I knew that they probably had a hard time relating to people in the military And sadly, it was an unsuccessful event. I think vets have a powerful voice in the U.S. that a lot of folks in the left need to hear and need to understand. But I think that the left is very uncomfortable with feelings about militarism, about dealing with patriotism, especially when it gets really fervent in our country. I mean, there's a lot of issues around that we need to overcome. Anyway, I just want to let you know that I do plan to join Veterans for Peace, and that this talk has been very encouraging for me. Thank you.
And I might suggest, it's Kit, is it Kit?
Yes, it's Kit.
You know, I would suggest to all of you that you go to the Veterans Healthcare Policy Institute website, which is veteranspolicy.org. I guess I could put it in the chat. And subscribe to the newsletter. It would help us and it would help you understand, because I think we really, you know, I'm so glad you mentioned this issue of, you know, trying to raise money for veterans. Very often, concern for veterans issues is expressed by people wanting to give to a particular veteran, or, you know, help a particular veteran, you know, go hiking or, you know, give, it's kind of charity. And I think that's obviously very important, but helping veterans through the VA is a really different aspect of supporting and connecting to veterans. And it's often a problem for us at Veterans Healthcare Policy Institute, because when you fundraise or something for a group like ours, which is involved in doing work at the system level, not just, you know, at the individual helping vet level or charitable level, you know, many groups want, well, I want to give, you know, I want to deal with Joe Smith, who's in the gutter, and I want to personally feel responsible for helping Joe Smith get out of the gutter, while you're not attacking the policies that drove Joe Smith into homelessness or whatever. So I would hope that folks would go to our website and check on what we're doing and join us, because that is a different level of help and helping veterans understand that people are for them. And somebody did mention the all volunteer military, and I just want to say that the civilian veteran divide, which I think always exists, has been greatly exacerbated by the all voluntary military, because these vets feel, you know, I'm the only one sacrificing for my country, willing to put my life on the line. You guys are all just lazy and want to party and, you know, are individualistic. They can't, I mean, one of the really important reasons for veterans to have contacts with people who are on the left and who are public spirited and have a sense of mission and purpose that is different from just getting rich or becoming a hedge fund manager or whatever, is that the military does inculcate in veterans, in its indoctrination, this divide between them and civilians. And civilians are constructed as sort of selfish, individualists, don't care about one another, don't have a sense of purpose, don't have a sense of service. The only way to serve your country is to essentially sign up and go kill other people somewhere else. And I think it's really important that we and the left combat this notion that's very, very epidemic in the veteran community, that, wait a minute, there's other ways to serve your country and to serve humanity than to joining up. And it's tragic that America only offers people that way to serve and be paid for their service. So I think that's another reason why we on the left, who are interested in social justice, who are interested in a moral purpose, and have a sense of people's duty to one another and solidarity, which is very important to vets. I think that's another reason why we should have more contact with vets.
Okay, thank you. Before we move on, I just want to interject one point that we have an increasing number of women vets in, and many of them are joining Veterans for Peace. And a very big issue is that of sexual harassment, sexual discrimination, sexual abuse, flat out rape, and these kinds of things. And this is one thing that's very much a problem. And the women vets that are in Veterans for Peace are very aware of this and working hard on this. So it's something we need to be aware of, that as women, more and more women join the military, more and more women are harassed and abused in various ways.
Right, and that's another connection, you know, another way that we as feminists can connect to women in the military. I mean, I think feminists are often quite hostile to the military because it's conceptualized as misogynist, which it is. And so I think that I'm really glad you raised that point, Jean, because I think that's another, I hate these terms, intersectionality, but it's another place where we can build alliances between civilian women and veterans.
Absolutely, thank you. Let me just clarify our stack. 1162 has spoken. 6894. Have you already spoken? Are you?
No, this is Sharon. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can everybody else hear you? I think so. So Sharon, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have the internet this morning. That's probably why Alan is having problems. Thank you so much for this presentation. I've learned an enormous amount, and I look forward to reading your book. I have two concerns or questions. One is about the charitable organizations. So I'm tempted always to give, I get mailings for the Paralyzed Veterans of America and also the Wounded Warriors Project. And I wonder what political role they play, though. I'm suspicious that they don't play a very good role at all.
Yeah.
The other question I have has to do with the economic draft. So as a veteran of the anti-war movement, I regret every minute I spent working against the draft. I don't regret supporting draft resistors at all, but I think, and I don't think that they got rid of the draft because we demanded it. The ruling class wanted to get rid of the draft, but I think it's a bad thing. If we had universal conscription, we would have a much bigger anti-war movement. And I think, but of course, privileged people or people with some affluence could still avoid it. I understand all that, but still, I think we need to talk about the economic draft directly. We should name it. We should call it. We should talk to high school students about how they're being drafted. And I wonder what you think about those two things.
Well, I think Steve will have something to say about this as well, but I would not, I mean, if I were giving money as a progressive, someone on the left, I would give money to Veterans for Peace or Veterans Healthcare Policy Institute. I wouldn't give it to PVA or Wounded Warriors. I certainly wouldn't give it to Wounded Warriors.
Right.
The PVA is complicated. I mean, I would definitely give it to PVA over Wounded Warriors. So if you want to give
right.
money, and you want to, but I would say that the people who are really on the side of the veterans are groups like ours, Vets for Peace and so forth, who are doing something real about this, the system. I mean, the reality is that, a lot of the veteran service organizations, PVA is considered a veteran service organization. I'm not sure about Wounded Warriors, but a lot of them have played a really pernicious role in privatization. They've all supported PVA, Wounded Warriors, have all supported the outsourcing of care to the private sector. They basically have nothing to lose if they get their vets, you know, so-called choice, because they can claim, look, we got you more benefits, you know, now you can go to a private sector doctor, et cetera. And other veterans charities, I mean, you know, if you want to help veterans, you really should be supporting legislation and legislative initiatives that expand the VA to more veterans, to their families and to their communities, because, you know, you have these small groups. There's something like 40,000 veterans charities. Most of them have been very negatively affected by the pandemic because most of them have only like 3 months of reserves. If there's ever a bad incident, they often close. I mean, an example of this is I don't know how many of you know the movie Thank You for Your Service or the book, but it was written and filmed about a program in Yountville, California, that was located in the state veterans home. It was a private, not-for-profit, very good. I work with these people, they're great. And they set up a small program for mostly Iraq and Afghanistan vets with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. And then tragically, you know, they took care of about 500 vets over 10 years. Tragically, one of their patients, who should have never been allowed into the military in the beginning, like so many of these vets who have you know, been mass killers, and he ended up being angry at the people who directed it and took 5 people hostage, killed the 3 women who directed the program and himself, and the program had to shut down. Now, if the VA has an incident like this, it doesn't have to shut down. You know, they don't shut down the largest healthcare system in the United States because of violence. And so this just shows the limits of this charity. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, the difference between social reformers and socialists in the 18th and 19th century Britain, and the aristocratic ladies who would visit the peasants, you know, and when they were sick, and give them baskets of food on occasion. And I think that if you really want to help veterans, you fight for a stronger, expanded VA. You fight for free education and healthcare for their family members and communities, et cetera, et cetera. You fight for climate change. You fight against the pollution of, you know, of water on bases. I mean, there's so many things you can join the fight for.
Okay, let me just run over the stack here because everybody's.
Can I say one more thing about what
my
Sharon?
other question?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, which I think is really, really important, the economic draft. And we, in our chapter about military recruitment and how and why younger people end up in the military today, where they come from, you know, it's really clear that unless you've, you know, had a 9/11 type incident last week, most people are not signing up out of personal patriotic fervor. They're signing up for a decent paying job with benefits, promised all kinds of career opportunities, eventual VA healthcare, GI Bill access, housing benefits. You spend 20 years in actual pension. The military offers so many things to young people that aren't available in their depressed urban or rural communities, that it's very much, recruitment is very much driven by what Sharon just called the economic draft. Ironically, among the 3 of us, the 3 co-authors of this book, we could not agree on the question that Sharon posed. Should the draft be reinstated as a way of forcing everybody who's draft age to grapple with the implications of US foreign and military policy disasters? When people are insulated from that, you don't have the ability that we had, those of us who were in the anti-war movement in the late 60s and 70s, to rally a lot of people because they were draft eligible. I mean, I ended up in the reserve officer training program briefly because I had been told, hey, if you're going to be drafted, better to go as an officer. Well, I learned otherwise and ended up campaigning my whole college career to abolish the draft, kick ROTC off campus, and end the war in whatever order any of those things could have been accomplished. But among the anti-war veterans that we interview in the book, even they don't agree. Rory Fanning, terrific former Army Ranger, has written a book about his experience, works with the Chicago Teachers Union, goes into the schools and does a counter recruitment program directed at discouraging young people in Chicago from signing up for junior ROTC. He is a socialist, anti-imperialist, does not favor bringing back the draft, wants to fight militarism, as best we can, mobilizing who we can, but without the pressure of the draft. Danny Sherson, retired major, West Pointer, author of 2 great books about his experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. He agrees with Sharon. Let's bring it back and make millions of people feel the heat, and they'll start paying attention to these issues and putting pressure on the politicians who've been a rubber stamp for forever wars for the last 20 years. So it's a tough one.
When I lived in Detroit in the early 80s, and I visited a school in the Black community and taught, because I knew a teacher, and I spoke in his social studies class, and it was almost all Black kids, and they got it right away when I talked about how they were being pushed into, fighting for something that they really didn't believe in, and, being recruited to go overseas and kill people. And then I went to the suburbs, and I knew another teacher out there, and I did my same spiel, and it was almost all white kids. And one kid got up and said, "But we need the chrome from Rhodesia." So his father worked in an auto plant, and he got it also about how come U.S. imperialism needs to be around the world, assuring that we had the minerals, etc.
Okay, Gene seems to be the only one worried about the stack here, but let me rebuild the stack. We have Raj, who hasn't spoken yet, and I'll put myself on the stack. And if anybody else wants to get on the new stack, please let me know. So next is Raj.
Thank you, Gene. So thank you very much for your presentation. I was a 1A in the draft during the Vietnam War, and I was a draft counselor at the Third Unitarian Church in Chicago. So I knew about the draft law, and I used that draft law knowledge with a unique situation I was in to avoid being drafted. But I told them at the medical checkup when I had to show up for that if I was sent, it was a Black sergeant who finally said, "Oh, so you're ready to be shipped to Nam?" I said, "Yeah, sure. But when I go there, I'm going to change sides." So he laughed, of course, as a kid, I was 24, but I found a way out. So I avoided, there's no way I was going to fight for US imperialism in any place, in Vietnam, for sure. And I had a way out. That's the difference. A lot of people didn't have a way out, and those who are poor. So my question to you is, give us a little knowledge of, how is this economic draft works right now? What are the least compensation for the lowest rank that they get, and what benefits do they get? Because people have to live in this system. A lot of people are not able to live in the system. Bringing back the draft, we may ask for it, but the point is the ruling class will not bring the draft unless they absolutely have to, because they know what happened last time. So give us, for the left to benefit, we need to know what is the economic aspect of how they get soldiers to fight for an imperialist war. If you could enlighten us with that. Thank you.
Steve, do you want to start?
Well, I'll just emphasize one thing, and Suzanne can talk about other aspects of the recruitment pitch, which we describe in the book. But look, as student debt has become this huge millstone around the neck of millions of people, the number one way these men and women in these storefront offices all across the country meet their recruitment quotas is through the promise of free higher education after you get out of the military. Young people are really conscious of not wanting to be saddled with ruinous amounts of student debt. And so the GI Bill, which was a great benefit to the World War II post-war generation of veterans, is still a major, major selling point for people from poor and working class backgrounds, whether they're white or non-white, don't come from the kind of families that can afford even higher education in public universities these days, because even that has become so expensive, much less private college or university tuition. But there are other parts of the package that Suzanne could perhaps mention.
Yeah, well, I mean, they basically promise, they promise people that they will be able to, it's upward mobility. They promise them not only that they will be able to use the GI Bill, they will get free healthcare forever afterwards. They don't really tell them that they have to have proven service-connected disability or a low income. They tell them that they will get the opportunity to be trained in jobs. If you all want to see what the pitch is like, go online and put in Go Army. It's their campaign, and it's very interesting because there's very little about fighting and everything about, mastering the tools of tomorrow, become a linguist, become a computer programmer. So the pitch is very little about going, abroad and fighting the horrible war on terror. I mean, there's militaristic pictures, but it's pretty interesting. The other thing, that they pitch is, pensions, housing, et cetera, et cetera. In reality, the pay is very low. And
How much is the pay?
Oh my goodness, I'd have to go into,
Is it above minimum wage? It has to be.
Oh, yeah. I don't even know if it's above the minimum wage. That would be very interesting to calculate. The
difference between working at minimum wage in the private sector as somebody, with only a high school education going into the military is, there's subsidized housing, subsidized food. You're not paying for your uniform. It's so much a better deal than working at McDonald's.
Right.
That there's annual pay increases if Congress gets around to approving them, base housing. It's presented as a package that has a lot of perks, and but it's all relative. They're not the kind of perks that are attractive to people who have other opportunities, unless they're from a second or third generation military family. They want to follow their father or their grandfather's footsteps to West Point or Annapolis or the Air Force Academy. I mean, officer class recruitment, that track is a different world, as it ends up being a different world in the military and in civilian life after the military.
And also, this just occurred to me, but in the various ways that people can support veterans or become involved in their struggles, one of the really disgusting things about the military is that if you are a service member and you have any kind of emotional or psychological problem, or you have a traumatic brain injury, or you report military sexual trauma. So there's many of these service members who act out in minor ways. They get into a fight on the weekend, they're insubordinate, their hair isn't cut the right way, they show up to formation twice late. And it becomes evident to their unit commanders that, or company commanders that, that they have some kind of medical emotional problem. The way the military works is your eligibility for benefits when you are discharged depends on your discharge status. This is kind of in the weeds, but it's also very interesting. And if you have a dishonorable discharge, and that's, you have to go through a court martial, and you have to, it's very serious, you know, murder, whatever. And there are very few of those discharges given out a year. I think it's like 1,000 or something like that. But a very common way of discharging a service member is through what's called a general or a other than honorable discharge. And if you have a general discharge, this is when they want to get rid of you quickly, right? They want to have deployable people on their books. Commanders are judged on how many deployable people they have on their books. So if they want to get promoted, it's in their interest, the way things are currently constructed, to chapter people out, not go through a lengthy medical discharge process. And so if you get a general discharge, and we write about it at length in our book, you can get access to VA healthcare, but not the GI Bill. So that is, the good news is, you know, your PTSD, like our friend Chris Goldsmith, you tried to kill yourself. You can get VA healthcare and put yourself together, but then after the struggle of putting yourself together, you want to get education. And the bad news is you have no access to the GI Bill. If you have an other than honorable discharge, and there's something like, I don't know, 600,000 people since 1980 who have these, you can't get access to the GI Bill or VA healthcare. And there's a big movement. Blumenthal has introduced a bill to deal with this. Swords to Plowshares and the Harvard Veterans Legal Clinic have introduced petitions to change the rulemaking at the VA. The Pentagon, well, they're really not going to move, but the Pentagon should be assaulted for the way they use these discharges to deny people promised benefits. And as Steve has pointed out, it's entirely unlike the private sector, you know, the workman's comp system, where, you know, if you get your arm cut off because of an unsafe machine, or you get black lung because you worked in an unsafe mine, and you got into a fight on the weekend, or you were insubordinate to your foreman, you aren't disqualified from getting on workman's comp benefits for your, you know, amputated arm or your black lung or your whatever, because you got into a fight. And this is an outrage that they should be able to deny promised healthcare and education to people who they recognize have emotional and physical problems that they just don't want to deal with. And there's many of these commanders who many commanders don't really understand the consequences of these discharges. Some do understand the consequences of these discharges and think that people are malingering or whatever. And so they want to really, you know, make an example of these people. And if you think you're going to get out of the military and have a good life, we're going to ruin your life. But this is an outrage. And it's an outrage, by the way, that everybody in America, I think, would agree is an outrage. It's just nobody knows about it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Gene put himself on the stack. I wanted to say two things. One is kind of more historical, even before my time, but it said that at Berkeley in the 1930s, there was a student group that called itself Veterans of Future Wars. And their slogan was, pensions now, fight later. which I still think is a good idea. But the other thing I wanted to say is, one of the is about Smedley Butler, the most decorated Marine of all time. He's basically a Marine's Marine. There was a section on Democracy Now!, I think last week, focused on his book because he was a real leader. Everybody loved him. He really supported the troops. But at one point he was approached and he wrote an excellent book called War is a Racket, where he has that session that he basically spent 33 years in the Marine Corps. And during that time, he was a gangster for capitalism. He very, very persuasive on that. But he was also, again, I don't think he would support any kind of draft or anything like that. And I certainly wouldn't either. But I just wanted to throw those two things out and let our speakers comment on that. And we do anyway. Go ahead if you have comments on that.
Yeah, I just ordered the new biography. Looking forward to getting it. Unfortunately, as we show in the book, there's not many dissenting members of the officer class today of his stature and character. I mean, a few. One very influential writer, thinker, whose own thinking evolved quite a bit, particularly after he left the military, is Andrew Bacevich. Has written a wonderful series of books critiquing US military and foreign policy in the 9/11 era. Went to West Point, taught at West Point, was a history professor at Boston University for many years, and now operates something called the Quincy Institute based in Washington, which tries to unite people who are progressive and some libertarians in campaigns against forever wars, never-ending military spending, and foreign interventions around the globe. So Andrew was retired as a colonel, served in the first Gulf War, lost a son in the Iraq War, I think is someone in that league. And our friend, Major Denny Sherson, Ghostwriters of Baghdad, terrific book about his experience as an officer leading men in Iraq and later Afghanistan. He's written one book recently called Patriotic Dissent, wonderful discussion of veterans and military affairs issues. So there are some folks out there who were certainly not generals, but part of the officer class who were transformed by their experience in the military and are leading spokespeople for peace and justice today.
Right. We shouldn't forget Ann Wright with Veterans for Peace, and Tulsi Gabbard also, who's been a very excellent spokesperson. Although, anyway, so thank you on that. So we'll move forward. It was somebody else on the stack. I see
Richard Kitt was still on.
Oh,
Richard Kitt, you haven't
Richard
taken
F.
that.
Richard Fallenbaum.
No, I was just going to say Rich and Kit. You haven't called on them. They've been on the stack for a long time.
Who is this? Rich and Kit?
They spoke. They were.
No, it was the other one. It was the other phone. That was not. It's still on. You can ask, but anyway, I'll go ahead.
Okay.
I think it's interesting that Biden has promised that he's not going to send American troops to fight in the Ukraine, and because he knows American troops don't want to fight in Ukraine, and they use people like the Azov battalion and the other assorted Nazis, and they use ISIS in Syria. Now they're using. That's why they don't need so many grunts on the ground, but also because they have to, because so I think I agree. It's wrong to characterize certainly non-commissioned people or non-officers as reactionaries. Even the support for Trump had a progressive aspect, because he he promised not to get the U.S. involved in foreign wars, and people knew that Clinton and Obama and Biden were warmongers and would why have a military if we don't use it? That was their slogan, and they knew that those sort of quote unquote left leaders were very cynical and about human lives and the lives of the American servicemen.
No, I think that's very true. I mean, Trump's many anti-interventionist head feints in the 2016 campaign enabled him to distinguish himself from Clinton's dismal record. Of course, over 4 years in the White House, after staffing so many top positions with generals who'd been involved in the forever wars, and obviously doing very little to change the substance of U.S. foreign and military policy, I think that's one of the reasons why fewer active duty military and some veterans did not support Trump the second time around, because he clearly had not delivered really on any real fundamental change other than announcing the agreement that led to the Afghan troop withdrawal under Biden.
Is Rich and Kit different from the person who spoke earlier? Hello?
Yes.
Also, they're also different from the phone number that was called before, which I haven't. Nobody's taken those hands down.
They've been waiting a long time.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm right here.
Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, I've been missed for 15 minutes. Thank you, Richard Fallenbaum, for paying attention. So first of all, I raised my hand originally when they were asking for the vote. I'm speaking. When they asked for the vote on who was a veteran. And I am one of those people. That's why I put my hand up in the first place. But then we've jumped about 3 or 4 issues since then. So that's one of my problems on the phone, where you can't see me and I can't, flip yellow beard and stuff that I want to speak. So the bottom line is, first of all, I am a vet. And I was stationed in Germany. Well, first of all, I got into the military because I got a draft notice. And this was before I was somewhat aware, like many people in 64 or 5, that there was a war going on or whatever. But I'm from a very, very small town in the valley where, is the second highest proportionately number of GIs, whatever, Navy, Air Force, whatever, died from my town than in any town in the United States, proportionally. A population of 10,000 people, I forget the numbers, the exact number, but a huge number of my people, kids I went to high school with, etc., died in the Vietnam War. And a lot of them got their brains scrambled. And obviously, before they went in, at every veterans, or whatever you call it, every November 11th parade down right through the middle of the street where my high school band was marching, promoting basically the war. And so anyway, that's a little backstory. But the other thing, if I can remember, of course, I'm going to have a memory problem right now. There's been many things I wanted to talk about long here. I want to apologize for getting Kit and Rich on there. I did that. That's the first time that Kit has come in on her own phone from the kitchen where I'm not. And I didn't know she was doing that. Caused a lot of confusion. I have to take that on me. Okay. That's my internal thing. So I don't know how people have all this trouble with the phone, but I'm glad I can at least hear y'all. And I do want to thank, I'm sorry, the 2 speakers, Gordon and number 1, the guy, I'm sorry.
Steve Early and Suzanne.
Oh, Steve. Yeah, Steve Early. And I loved it. I absolutely agree with it. I wish one of our presenters, who is not going to be on for a while, he's ready, but Al, our Sargis, is our main guy, along with Eugene, I guess. I would say they're kind of one-to-one, who talks about the military all the time and has done a lot of research over a long period of time. He used to be a teacher. He's not on today, or at least I haven't heard his name. And I can't see the stacks. I can't see nothing on the phone. And he has done many sessions for us about the military. He was a Marine like Eugene. And so I wish he was here today, but he has a lot to say from a very slightly different point of view than what y'all have done your program on. So on the question of, I want to speak briefly on the question of draft, no draft. I know I'm split again, like many things. I think Sharon's argument is good, but I mean, it's more true equality. We're all in the same dump, you know. We're all going to get screwed one way or another, and or confused. If we had more influence, if we could gain more influence within the military instead of less, like we've got apparently, it's really not clear. But in the past, there's always been opposition to the war that any GIs that were in. There's always been a section of them that knew they were against it and somehow got there and hopefully didn't die. But a lot of people's brains get scrambled. I was in Germany and mine got scrambled. And I ended up marrying a German woman and brought him home a few times when I got out of the service. And in the end, it ended up splitting up, and I've lost a son. In other words, I haven't seen him for 20 years. And, you know, lots of personal issues, but they're very personal. But every GI that goes to Germany gets under this pressure. Why are they in Germany? Because of Vietnam. Why are they in Germany and Vietnam? Because of the U.S. military imperialism. Why are they out there on the weekends drinking beer with German women? Oh, I see. It starts to come together. We go all over the world, get women pregnant, and because we're a normal 19, 20-year-old guy that's way off balance, and we come home with all this crap. Responsibility, irresponsibility, whatever you want to call it. I'm not very proud of it. I tried. I tried like hell. I learned to speak German and blah, 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 blah. I did a lot of things right, good intentions, I'll say. A lot of things didn't work out. Okay, and I'm still angry about it, and I'll never not be angry. And the damn war in Vietnam 50 years ago has affected me up till now, up till today and tomorrow. I made a vow in the anti-war movement. You know, I wouldn't quit till the war was over. The war was over, and I thought, oh, there's another war. What's the difference? It's all the same shit. You know, it's U.S. imperialism. Somewhere else, guys just like me out, getting a beer on the weekend, getting in trouble. I'm just saying, it's messed up. I don't care how you look at it. We don't belong there. We all know that. We're a very small voice. You know, we need to wind up the machine again and get to work. Now, I've said a lot, very personal. I'm going to jump off here. And if I put my hand up again, it's because I'm trying to talk sign language with you all at the center. And if Kit number comes up, she's independent today from Rich and Kit. Should really just be Rich again. Thanks for all the. Bye-bye.
Jane wants to interject right now because my internet is not working correctly and I can't do very much. So I'm going to have to log off and try to log back on. And Richard Fallenbaum, can you take over in terms of keeping the stack and so forth? And I will try to get back on. But if I don't, make sure we pause at the end for summary from our speakers. So I'll
go ahead.
Back on. And
go
great
ahead,
to see everybody. This has been a great session so far.
Go ahead, Mark. And would somebody take down the hands of the phone people who have this? Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, just a point here about the VA again. You know, the VA is also a history receptacle. For instance, you can go to the VA right now and you can find out that in World War II, 16,199,566 Americans were in a uniform. And that was by September 2nd, 1945. And that was 12.2% of then the American population. You can also find from the VA too, that those who were 15 years old and older with regards to the male population. Through military age, 1/3 were gone. So who had to pick up the slack? The women. They're the ones working in the factory. So it's a giant community scene, probably the greatest community scene this country's ever had. Yet the Rand Corporation will tell you that between September 12, 2001 and the end of September 2015, in response to 9/11, that 2,774,000 and change Americans put in over 5,600,000 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, talking about picking up the share of the load. And then you wonder why you have PTSD.
Can you put that link in the chat, the Rand one?
If you give me your, I'll tell you what, I'm going to put my email address in the chat. If you want, email me and I'll send it to you.
I wonder if Richard Wright, is it Richard Wright? If you could put your email address in the chat, Richard, because I'd love to contact you about your experience in the OIG office.
I think, yeah, go ahead. Well, yeah. Okay, actually, we're coming to the, I think Richard got it and he's going to do that. But we're sort of coming to the end of our 2 hours. So I'd like to ask Steve and Suzanne if they have any last words to sum up. And then we'll go into a sort of informal, unregulated discussion, and for anybody who wants to stick around. So Suzanne, would you like, or Steve, would you like to say a last word?
Steve do it.
I just have a couple of comments about the last couple of speakers. I mean, this was a terrific discussion, and as we knew, with so many people having personal experience relevant to these topics, it's really been great. The speaker who talked about serving in Germany, one of the books that we cite in our book is by David Vine. It's called Base Nation, and it's a really interesting study of the impact of more than 800 US military facilities all around the globe. And they are, for a variety of reasons, not often a healthy work environment for the US soldiers stationed there. And of course, they have, even in non-combat situations like Iraq or Afghanistan, not a great social and economic impact on the neighbors, on the local people. So definitely that book addresses this problem of young people, part of the recruiter pitch, being told you're going to join the military, get a good job, get these benefits, you're going to see the world. The way that U.S. men and women in uniform see the world is not the way that you'd really want to see the world. And it's not the way that we want other people in the countries that have to host these bases want to interact with Americans. It's not a very healthy relationship, as we know. And Mark's point, I think, also is something that we emphasize in the book. If you downsize the military, you get rid of this vast conscript citizen army with its tendencies towards Vietnam era restiveness and rebelliousness, and you narrow the military workforce down to the all volunteer force. It's like 1% of the population at any one time. Veterans are down to like 7% of the adult population. And the way these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were run, as Mark just indicated, was by repeated deployments of the same people. Special operators being the tip of the counterinsurgency spear, but a lot of National Guard members, reservists, and regular Army folks ended up going back over and over and over again and being needlessly exposed to all kinds of hazards and conditions, which have greatly added to the $7 or $8 trillion total cost of our 9/11 wars.
Thank you, Steve. Well, that will bring us to the end of our recorded portion of our program. We're now going to turn off the record, or at least cut it off we won't post any more of this session on YouTube. Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.